On February 23, 1991, McDonald's opened their first location in Jakarta on the island of Java, making Indonesia the 50th country to embrace the Golden Arches since the fast food brand started franchising in the 1950s. Soon, locals were lining up for their first taste of Big Macs, fries, and other grease-laden American treats. And while Indonesians certainly seemed to be loving it, others were less enthusiastic. Among their number was self-proclaimed rock god David Bowie.
I was travelling in Java when the first McDonald's went up. It was like, for fuck's sake. The invasion by any homogenised culture is so depressing. The erection of another Disney World in, say, Umbria more so. It strangles the indigenous culture and narrows expression of life.
His annoyance at this cultural invasion must have taken root in Bowie's mind, ultimately bearing fruit several years later in 1997 and producing I'm Afraid of Americans, his last charting single in the US until 2015's Black Star. Incidentally, as of 1997, there were approximately 75 McDonald's locations across Indonesia. It's weird, but true. I'm Afraid of Americans wasn't a reaction to mass shootings or anti-LGBTQ sentiment or the military-industrial complex or any other more dramatic modern-day gripe about the USA. It was McDonald's that drew the musical ire of Mr. Bowie, inspiring him to write a diss track about an entire country. In the 27 years that have followed the song's release, it would be an understatement to say that the world has changed. With this change has come an evolution of global attitudes towards America and its citizens, and consequently the way we hear this song. What started as a reaction to Bowie's frustration with American hegemony has taken on new interpretations, shifting from mild annoyance to pity and sometimes outright contempt towards the nation. But before we dig into the evolution of the song's interpretation, let's take a look at how it developed from an outside outtake to the final form that we know today. The first version was recorded in late 1994 during the sessions for the One Outside album. At this time, it was known as Dummy, and it was being developed for the soundtrack to the film adaptation of Johnny Mnemonic, which was slated to come out later that year. The song's final touches are chronicled in the book A Year with Swollen Appendices by noted skillet enthusiast Brian Eno, where we learn that working with Bowie could be a bit scattered.
11th January. David called at 7:50 a.m., full of tangential ideas, the kind of ideas people usually have when their lyrics aren't ready. But no, these were genuine enthusiasms. A soundtrack for this, a title song for something else. No mention of actually finishing the album. I want to leave here with some kind of result, not just more promising bits and pieces all half finished. Good day's work, but only on Johnny Mnemonic, aka Dummy, aka I'm Afraid of Americans. Proposed title music for same.
Eno allegedly convinced Bowie to retract his submission for the Johnny Mnemonic soundtrack, though this early version can still be found on 2022's Brilliant Adventure EP. By this point, the song was called Johnny Downloader and featured some hallmarks of the song's final version, such as the punctuations throughout, and the subject of the lyrics being Johnny, but with a chorus that will be unfamiliar to those who have only listened to the Earthling version.
Johnny gotta download, move fast. Johnny covered up, Johnny go wild, wild party guy.
Rather than being part of the 90s cyberpunk flick in the end, the song was used in Paul Verhoeven's cinematic masterpiece, Showgirls. Though this iteration was called I'm Afraid of the Animals and was closer to the song's final form, with the lyrics in more or less their final order, but with the song's subject reverted back to Dummy, which is honestly kind of fitting, given the film it was used for.
Nomi's got heat.
Does she know?
Dress.
Thanks. How you bought it at Versace? used to love doggy chow.
I saw you! Man, everybody got AIDS and shit.
By mid-1996, the Outside Tour was winding down, and the seeds of Bowie's next project, Earthling, were starting to sprout. In August, he began working with guitarist Reeves Gabriel and engineer Mark Plati, using demos recorded while on the road, and creating the album's foundation, with finishing touches and overdubs being added in the fall from pianist Mike Garson, bassist Galen Dorsey, and drummer Zachary Alford. It was during these recording sessions that I'm Afraid of Americans was stitched together, cleaned up, and resurrected as a techno track, with Johnny back as the subject of the song and the addition of the God is an American bridge section. Finally, a remix was done by Trent Reznor, for which a music video was filmed and released in late 1997. So the thing about the 90s is that they were one of the most peaceful and prosperous times in Western history. And yet, looking at some of the music and the media from that era, you wouldn't necessarily know that this was the case. And in the absence of a unifying crisis or threat, the focus turned more and more towards the philosophical. I think that this is important to understand when approaching Bowie's intent behind the song, because looking at it today, with the discourse around America being very extreme, it is easy to assume that the criticism here is more pointed than it was, according to the man himself.
It's all wrapped up in one of those stereotypical Johnny songs. Johnny does this, Johnny does that. In this particular one, he's hauled up as the most mundane, Philistine elements of what everybody hates about America. The face of America that we have to put up with is the McDonald's Disney Coke face. This really homogenous, bland cultural invasion that sweeps over us. The song's not terribly hostile, actually. It's just a bit whingy.
Initially, I'm Afraid of Americans was meant to express discomfort, but not necessarily hostility. It was an airing of the grievances set to an industrial beat, a musical bitch fest, if you will. In the lyrics, our standard issue protagonist, Johnny, stumbles through life looking for the American dream. Soft drinks, intelligence, a sexual conquest, self-reliance, a sense of humor. It all feels rather familiar and uninteresting. But at the same time, there is a sense that there's something darker lurking under the surface. The Reznor mix turns the menace up as the album version's lighter techno sound is joined by a grinding industrial pulse. Maybe there's something off about Johnny. The video certainly feels sinister, with allusions to gun violence and religious fanaticism, and Johnny has shown his darker side before in a song from 1979's Lodger called Repetition.
Well, Johnny is a man, and he's bigger than her. Guess the bruises won't show if she wears long sleeves, but the space in her eyes shows through.
But neither the song nor the video ultimately point a finger at a specific issue or cause, keeping the general interpretations of the day firmly in the realm of giving America a bit of a side-eye, rather than the actual fear that the title suggests. However, this more relaxed interpretation was not to last for long. Less than 2 years later, the world would look on in horror as the deadliest school shooting to that point unfolded on an April morning in 1999. And in 2001, the shock of 9/11 made a distant fear tangible. The decades that have followed have been marked by uncountable conflicts, growing divisions within society and politics, several unprecedented crises and once-in-a-lifetime events, with impacts spreading beyond America's borders in our increasingly connected world. We've all but gone numb to mass shootings in the US and terrorist attacks abroad, and we've decided that we're now living in a post-truth society. And all along the way, this song has been dredged up and tangled into the outrage du jour, while our understanding of the song has darkened with each layer of tragedy, each reminder of how quickly things can spiral. So, does this evolving interpretation betray Bowie's intent? How can we say that the song relates to feelings of fear and anxiety stemming from events that we couldn't possibly have known about all the way back in 1997? To answer this question, we can look to Bowie himself, who seemed comfortable with the philosophy of death of the author, where the audience brings their own personal context and impressions to the interpretation of the work, taking priority over the creator's original intent. He sometimes even favored external interpretations of his work over the original meanings he had in mind, encouraging a conversation between the artist and the listener about a song's true meaning.
What it comes down to is my interpretation of my work is really immaterial. I'm not really a believer in art or music being institutionalised or put in galleries and stuff like that. I think art is something for the use of the public. It's for the public to interpret it and to use almost like a sustenance to life. It's the interpretation of the listener or the viewer which is all important.
And showing his inclination towards spotting trends early on, in 1999, he even predicted that this trend would grow at an exponential rate as the internet provided a direct link between creators and those who consume their work, allowing this conversation to become more commonplace.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about. The idea that the piece of work is not finished until the audience come to it and add their own interpretation, and what the piece of art is about is the grey space in the middle. That grey space in the middle is what the 21st century is going to be about.
In short, Bowie likely would have welcomed fans using his work as a shorthand for America is fucking up, and I'm kind of scared about it. Given the themes of some of the work he produced in the 2000s and 2010s, which touch on topics like gun violence, religious hypocrisy, post-9/11 American society, and military conflicts, he may have even agreed with the sentiment. So here we are. Time has marched on and has dragged us forward into increasingly strange and somewhat frightening places, and we have, in turn, brought this song along for the ride, imbuing it with new meanings and using it as we navigate this brave new world. Bowie handed the song over to us as we approach the start of a new millennium and let the listeners continue its evolution. So maybe overthinking the song is a bit of a fool's errand, and maybe it doesn't matter if it started as a jab at McDonald's or a more abstract discomfort with cultural dominance. What matters in the end is how it makes us feel and how its legacy reflects not just Bowie's concerns, but society's own evolving fears.
I'm a friend